Hey everybody, how's it going? I have a watermark on my shirt. I spilled a little bit of water on my shirt. I don't feel like changing it just to do a video. I know, there's a watermark on my shirt. Get it out of your system. Laugh. Okay. Today I wanted to read this article and give you some thoughts on it. It says landlords sue for U.S. for rent unpaid under eviction moratorium. So they are suing the government, and it says a landlord's lobbyist said it sued the U.S. government to recover damages the organization claims its members suffered as a result of a federal moratorium on evictions. The National Apartment Association filed a lawsuit Tuesday at the U.S. Court of Federal Claims in Washington, the organization said in a statement. The complaint wasn't immediately available in the court's electronics docket. The NAA claims that by the end of last year, more than 10 million delinquent tenants owed $57 billion in unpaid rent. Apartment owners are now responsible for $27 billion of debt not covered by federal rental assistance, the group argues. The moratorium issued by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control last year had hurt landlords who provide critical rental housing and sets a dangerous precedent for future disaster response measures, according to the complaint. Property owners forced to maintain their properties were unfairly prohibited from evicting tenants not paying rent and from renting to paying tenants, according to the suit. The U.S. Justice Department didn't immediately respond to an email seeking comment on the suit. The CDC moratorium was put in place by former President Donald Trump's administration and extended under Biden. It had been set to expire June 30th before the CDC announced what it said was a final one-month extension on June 24th. That's final. Last month, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to lift the federal moratorium on evictions during the COVID-19 outbreak, leaving the ban in place until the end of July. By a 5-4 vote, the justices rejected calls by landlords and real estate trade associations from Alabama to Georgia to block the moratorium while a challenge goes forward. The groups claim the CDC exceeded its authority by imposing the ban. So let's dive into this a little bit. So I don't think that what happened here was a matter of public health policy per se when they put together this eviction moratorium. I think it was more done for the basic stability of civilized society. Now, people get evicted all the time. There are recessions. There are times where, just people fall on hard times and they're not able to pay their rent. You do have some people out there that are just bums that just don't do anything and they lead very irresponsible lives. You have people that become ill. There's many different reasons for people to get evicted. But the one reason that society is not going to accept, if you consider society to kind of be like a game that people are playing on a regular basis, is when they're willing and able to work, the government says you're not essential, so you're not allowed to work, you're not allowed to make money, but you still need to pay your bills, and if you don't pay your bills, you will be tossed out on the street. People are willing to play a game, and people are willing to lose at that game. They're willing to take risks to try to get ahead and screw up in that game and deal with the consequences. But what most people are not willing to do is play a game that is just fundamentally, it feels rigged. And if you were to tell people en masse, you're not allowed to work, you're not essential, the company you work for may actually be bankrupted by the time that this is over, so even once this is over, you don't have a job to go back to. By the way, you owe $20,000 or $30,000 at the end of next year, and if you don't pay it, you go out on the street. That's going to be a game that most people say, you know what, I'm not playing anymore. And what they'll do is they'll take the Monopoly board and go boop. And what that's going to look like, in my opinion, if that were to happen, would make whatever happened at the end of May and early June last year in major cities across the country look like a kid's birthday party. Because people, if you can evict 1 or 10 or 20 or 50 people, but when you try to evict 1 million, 2 million, 4 million, 8 million all at the same time, and you have them all on the street, they're not going to really have much invested in being a part of society anymore because they're cast out of it. So I think that this eviction moratorium is something put in place not just because, you'll prevent the spread of COVID by having less people moving around and stuff like that, but more so because if the government shut down businesses and stopped people from being able to make money while not protecting people from the consequences of that society, people were just going to opt out of living in civilized society, and that would not be good for anybody. At the same time, you also do have to ask the question, what about the landlords? You do have landlords like BlackRock that can afford to take the hit. they can afford to take the hit. And people who may have investments or invested in BlackRock may lose a little bit on their investments. Anybody that's invested in stock before understands that there's no returns guaranteed, and your investment may go to zero at any time. That is the risk of investing, and such is life. But you do also have people that actually own the home that they purchased. Maybe they bought another home. They actually work full time. These may be people that make $20,000 or $30,000 a year that work their whole lives, and now they have to pay a mortgage or property tax or maintenance on a property that they're not allowed to charge rent on. That's going to hurt a lot of smaller landlords. That's going to hurt people that are not even really doing landlording as a job or a means to make money. But they need to pay to upkeep their property, and it's going to be painful if the law says that you can't at least hover the threat over someone's head of, hey, if you don't pay me for 1 or 2 years, you're going to get kicked out. There are going to be a lot of people that just can't afford to pay rent, and that may just pay as they can. They're going to pay what they can as it goes. And you're also going to have a lot of scumbags that are like, listen, I may only have been affected by the pandemic 10 or 20%. I'm going to pay zero because I just have the right to pay zero. So I'm going to pay you zero, and court's closed. You can't kick me out. I'm paying you zero. And that's kind of wrong, but you are going to have people that do that. There are scumbags in this world. And the thing is, being a politician right now really does appear to be about who is going to pick up the pitchfork first. So you have to choose who is going to take the hit. Even if you were to pay all these landlords all this money, well, what are you paying it out of? You're paying it out of money that you print, or you're paying it out of money that you taxed, which you took from the landlords and the people that are paying taxes to begin with. But a lot of the people that are not paying rent are not paying rent because they got kicked out of their jobs, and they're not even taxpayers anymore. So where is this money coming from? Like, there's no real easy solution to this, because the money that's going to go to these landlords, if they actually win the suit, is just going to be money that comes out of others, just tax revenue, or with the deficits that we run, money that is printed, which just results in more and more inflation. There's no real easy answer here. So when you have something like this happen, you really just have to choose, which group do I want to piss off less, the landlords or the tenants? And granted, at some point, I understand how a group of tenants are going to decide, a group of landlords are going to decide, you can't just take my property from me and tell me that I can't live there. Again, let's say that you're a landlord, and let's say that you actually have a job. Let's say you have a job, and you work 40 hours a week, and you live in an apartment, and you have a house that you purchased that you're still paying a mortgage on that's your property. Let's say that you actually lost your job, so now you can't afford to live in your apartment. So you can't live in that, you're not going to be able to live in that apartment, so you're like, okay, I'll move back and live in my house. You can't live in the house that you pay for, you can't afford your apartment, and you can't kick the person out of the house that you own because... So they may have a larger right to that property than you do in the place that you live. Like, I get where landlords are coming from, and I get why they're pissed. But I think what politicians are doing at this point is just thinking, okay, which group, how do we prevent there from being a monopoly board tipping event and riots across the entire country right now? Because either of these decisions are going to have a consequence. If you say that, there's an eviction moratorium where for this period of time you can't kick people out, there's going to be a consequence one way or another. It's just that the consequence of the landlords picking up pitchforks, I imagine, would be far less than the consequences of the tenants picking up pitchforks, because on average there are more tenants than there are landlords. There's probably more tenants than there are landlords, so there's a lot more anger there. Now, it's about whether that you're going to deal with the short-term effect of, if you try to evict 4 or 8 million people all at once, the society becoming completely destabilized, or the long-term effect, which is, again, if you say that you can't evict people, or you can just take a landlord's property and say you're not allowed to say what can be done with your property, that's probably going to have some ripple effect, a butterfly effect later on when it comes to policy, people's incentive structures, what people decide to do. But that's far off. We could deal with that later. But what's really interesting is how the can keeps getting kicked down the road. This eviction moratorium was supposed to end several times, but they recognize that it's not something that can be easily ended without a transitionary program in place to deal with this. And I do kind of wonder what that is going to be. Is that going to be UBI? Is that going to be rent forgiveness for all of these individuals? And if there is rent forgiveness, how are they going to deal with that to get the landlords compensated? Because if the case is going to be, okay, there's a moratorium on evictions, we're gonna end it in, let's say, August or September or October, but if you owe $15,000 in back rent, because you were called non-essential by your government. You were willing, able, capable, and ready to work and told you could not. And now you do not have a company to go back to because your employer, who you were loyal to for 15 years, is now out of business. You're probably going to want to pick up a pitchfork. And it would be understandable if you did, regardless of the morality of it. I'm not saying it's moral or ethical to do that. I'm just saying where I think people's minds lie. You're going to want to do that because the game just seems unfair and horribly rigged. And you may not direct your anger where it should be directed. You may just direct it at whatever's in front of you, and that's not going to be good in any way, shape, or form. But how do you get out of an eviction moratorium? Again, if you have this case where you have, in spite of all of the programs that have been put out, $27 billion of debt not covered by federal rental assistance, either the landlords are going to be asked to eat that, or the eviction moratorium will be up and the landlords won't be asked to eat that, but they will evict all of these people. And when they evict all these people at the same time, there's going to be some sort of uprising as a result of that. I don't see any politician being the one that wants to be the person who says, I'm the reason that eviction moratoriums are over. At some point, eviction moratoriums will need to be over. It is not sustainable to be able to have large swaths of the population pay $0 in rent and not be able to get kicked out of a property that is not there. That's just not sustainable. It fundamentally just goes against the concept of property rights in this country. At the same time, you can't just end it immediately because then you will have the uprising. And as I said in the outdoor dining video, you'll have to deal with the result of a policy. There is no such thing as the ideal policy. There are only trade-offs, and you have to figure out which trade-offs make sense. And what I see happening right now, no politician, no person at no agency wants to be the individual that is responsible for 2 or 4 or 8 or 12 or 20 million people getting kicked out of their homes all at once because they don't have the money to pay their rent because they got kicked out of their job. And this is just going to get kicked down the road again and again and again. It's going to kick the can and kick the can and kick the can. And I almost don't blame them. Who would want their name in the newspaper in the front page as the reason? You are the single reason that this is all happening. It's not that multiple people in our government got together and came up with the policies that have been going on over the past year and a half. It's not that a virus happened and this is how we responded and this is what led to this. Who wants to be the person that's featured in that article in the headline as the individual responsible, or one of the 5 individuals responsible for millions of people getting evicted? Because that's how I imagine that something like this is going to happen. Whoever winds up saying, okay, eviction moratorium is over, is going to be seen as the devil for a very long time, even if they are not the person that really did anything wrong. Nobody wants to push that button. It's much easier to just kind of kick the can down the road and see, what happens. How does this affect society? How does this affect incentive structures? How does this affect property owners? Will they get angry? And maybe see what happens there rather than have everything explode right now. And it's really weird because I'll read these articles from time to time where they'll talk about things like how the economy is recovering and how much spare cash consumers have in their wallet. Consumers are flush with cash. There's going to be this giant economic boom and blah, blah, blah. And just stuff like this. Again, $27 billion in debt not covered by federal rental assistance. And we're only talking about on the books. We're only talking about landlords that are part of whatever NAA study or survey was done to figure this out. We're only talking about landlords that are actually doing things above board. We're only talking about what's reported. How much of that money that's being reported as being in consumers' wallets, just waiting to be spent on this economic boom, is actually money that would have been paid in rent, that once they are actually forced to pay rent again, or once they're forced to pay their back rent, is going to be money that is not available for this economic boom. I just find it really strange that we're talking about how we have these economic recoveries and everything's coming roaring back, while at the same time, we actually have to have a mandate, a federal moratorium on being able to evict people, because if you have the capability to evict someone from your property, well, that means that society just completely destabilizes and falls apart. Because let's face it, again, we're in 2021 now. Vaccines have been available for over 6 months for free. Again, I get it, taxpayer funded, not not. I get the libertarian sense of it. Just don't nitpick there with the words. You get the point. Vaccines have been freely available to anybody who wants one for over 6 months. Even as the curve of cases goes up, the deaths is not even remotely following the cases at this point as a result of vaccinations and us being able to treat people a little bit better now than a year ago. This is not about health at this point, in my opinion. This is not about like health in the CDC sense of protecting, of being a public health crisis. So we're going to keep people from getting sick with this eviction moratorium. This is about the health of our society, our government, and our way of life with regards to our society is so unstable right now that if you try to mass evict millions of people that will be mass evicted as a result of not having the money to pay their rent, that society just completely gets tossed into total destabilization. So it's really weird when I read stuff about economic recoveries and how much better everything's doing. Our economy is so great, that you have to have a law against evicting people. Well, not a law. You have to have a temporary mandate against evicting people, because if you evict people, the society it'll just fall apart. Everything will fall apart if you're able to evict people. You can't expect people to actually pay their rent. That says a lot. That says a lot about the health of the supposed economic recovery. And you have to combine this with a bunch of other factors when I'm talking about those pitchforks that would come out, when I'm talking about the destabilization of society. You have areas like New York City where apartments over the past 20 years, again, you've gone from being able to pay $700 or $800 for a decent apartment to now, $2,300 to $3,000 for a decent apartment. When you have apartments that have tripled in cost over a period of 20 years, you have a lot of average, everyday working class people that have just been pushed out of the ability to have a home. You have a lot of people that used to not need to have a roommate that now have 3 roommates for a job that they may have had 1 roommate or 0 roommates for 20 years ago. You have a lot of people across the country that are experiencing this in their own neighborhoods. So there are, again, this is not just a New York thing anymore where everything is becoming more expensive. You have real estate prices and apartment rents climbing across the country like crazy. And that comes to a peak when you get to a point where you're not allowed to go to work. You're not allowed to make money. But once this thing passes, we expect you to be able to pay all that rent for that time where we told you you're not allowed to make money. And that's going to result in not even anger at the government or the landlord, but a lot of people just have anger that they toss out everywhere in society. It's just going to splatter everywhere like a paintball. And that's not going to be good for anybody. I am not looking forward to the day that the eviction moratorium ends, because I don't see how you get there without either A, massive destabilization of society, or B, some sort of transitionary program that will result in a lot of taxation on not just the rich, but the middle class, or C, a giant amount of inflation as a result of it. Because at the end of the day, you did have a year where a lot of these people were not producing. If people are working, if people are doing stuff, producing stuff, creating things, then you don't have to worry about inflation as much as you do if you have a long period of time where productivity is decreased, but then you increase the amount of money that's available. This is going to be a mess. And there's no simple solution to any of this. Like, a lot of people are going to say there's a very easy solution to these problems. There's no easy solution to this. There's no easy way out of this. And my God, am I happy that I am not a politician and that I do not work for the government right now, because you have 2 choices. You either tell everybody to take the medicine, get your name in the front page headlines of all the news, and get pitchforked, or B, just keep kicking the can down the road. Just keep kicking the can down the road. Keep kicking the can down the road, and hope that by the time that thing blows up, it blows up in some other politician's face. Those are 2 choices that I do not want to be dealing with. And it's a good time to be a MacBook repairman. I'll just leave it at that. Bad time to be a politician. Bad time to be a policymaker. Good time to be a MacBook repairman. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. That's it for today, and as always, I hope you learned something.